EM Weekly starting right now, bringing emergency managers from around the world together to learn, share and collaborate.
Good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today, we're going to be talking about disaster recovery. And, disaster recovery, I've said this multiple times. We do response really well, but recovery, for whatever reason, we just seem to not be able to get over that hump. And so today I have Mark O'Mara, who serves as Hagerty's Director of Recovery, and he's experienced disaster recovery. He's probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the United States on the area of disaster recovery. So I'm really excited to have Mark here with me. Mark, welcome to EM Weekly.
Great. Thank you for having me, Todd. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity and the introduction. And while I have been working in this industry for over 15 years now, there are very many capable individuals out there. I don't want to steal any of their thunder as well. And the reality is recovery takes a lot of people from a lot of different stakeholders and federal, state, local, et cetera. So it certainly takes more than a village in order to do recovery well.
Why does it feel, even if it's not 100% accurate, if we're going to say it like that? I know there's a lot of great dedicated people in recovery. Matter of fact, I teach disaster recovery as a sole subject at the college. But why do we do recovery, or why is it so clunky? Why is it so poorly done? When we see disaster response, obviously it's on TV, it's sexy, the helicopters are flying around, you got lights and sirens going, people in boats, all this kind of stuff. And when it comes to recovery, it seems like it's a slow, painful process. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Todd. It can absolutely be very slow and very painful. I wish there was a silver bullet as to why, but the reality is there's a lot of different whys. I will also just say, look, recovery is hard. It takes a very long time. No two recoveries are ever the same. You have different priorities, different geographic, demographic, and political realities, right? You have different visions on what recovery looks like and what it should be and what it should not be. Also a good recovery isn't just returning the community or the individual back to where it was prior to the incident. It's returning them back bigger, better, stronger, right? Making them more prepared or more resilient for some future similar incident. And in order to do all those things, it's a difficult process. I would also say that one of the biggest reasons why recovery is so difficult or painful, as you put it, is because it's a very complex process, right? You have dozens of different federal funding programs, often that do not work well with each other. There's duplication of benefit concerns. There's issues associated with timeline. You often require literally an act of Congress to get certain approvals and allocations of funding. So it's not an easy process. And I think that if there's one thing we can collectively do as a community, emergency management and disaster recovery community, to make the process less painful and certainly expedite the process, it's reducing that complexity. Right, at every level throughout the process, whether it be federal laws, policies, guidance, whether it be the state or the recipient implementation of the FEMA PA program or the grantee from the HUD-DR programs, or at the local level, right, coming to clear understanding as to what the community wants to do in order to move forward in their recovery. But reducing the complexity is certainly the number one thing we can do to help streamline recovery.
I've gone through a couple of disaster recovery issues, over the years, and it seems like, when FEMA comes in and starts looking at what we're doing, when we're doing our projects and whatnot, my feeling is they come in with the idea of trying to get to no, right, to the answer no. They're not trying to get to the answer yes. They're not trying to help you go through the process to get to a yes. Well, why is that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. First, I want to start by saying I really appreciate all of the hard work that FEMA does throughout the country. Let's be 100% honest. no one could recover without FEMA. And I know a lot of really, really good, strong Americans who work for FEMA that want nothing else but to help people recover from their disasters or their catastrophic incident. And many of the folks that we work with at Hagerty Consulting who are on the FEMA side of the house, they're trying to be helpful in every way, shape, and form, right? So I first want to give credit where credit's due. I mean, FEMA, it has a very hard task. They're being asked to do things that, quite honestly, they probably shouldn't be responsible for doing, especially when you look at, now with COVID-19 and 59 major disaster declarations for the same incident for the first time ever, unprecedented policies, regulations, funding dollars, over $5 trillion of funding as a result of COVID, right? So I want to set the stage there first by saying FEMA's trying, right? And there are some really good people at FEMA that I don't want to overlook. And we appreciate everything that they do. And we work collaboratively with them and state stakeholders as well. That being said, I think that the FEMA PA program specifically has become so complex and there's so much policy and so much guidance out there that it's very easy to find contradicting guidance, right? It's very easy to have different interpretations at the local level, at the state level, even at FEMA regions. We're seeing, FEMA regions across the country interpreting COVID guidance completely differently. And then implementing that guidance completely differently as well, right? So it might be eligible for one community or one state, but the exact same expenditure or scope of work might be ineligible for another community or another state. And then I think the other thing is that everybody's scared of audit. Everybody's scared of an OIG finding that, look, OIG never comes out and says everything was done perfectly, right? That's not their role. And I'm not saying it should be their role, but there's so much emphasis placed on that it's really difficult to find a path to yes. And I would say that, finding that path to yes would be, from a FEMA perspective, the single greatest factor to benefit those applicants or those subrecipients who have been impacted by these disasters, right? Trying to help them get to yes as opposed to get to no is going to make the process more expeditious. It's going to result in a happier applicant, right? Because they're not just constantly fighting. That's the other thing. You look at the appeal process. It might take you 12, 18, 24 months to get through an appeal and or second appeal or arbitration process right now, right? How can you have a successful recovery when you can't even argue your case for 2 years after the initial determination memo, right? So there's certainly some opportunities for improvement. I think also the other thing that would help significantly is empowering the local FEMA authorities, right? The FCOs, the individuals who are on the ground who can make calls based on the specific circumstances of the case being presented in front of them. No recovery is the same, as we already spoke about, and there's no reason why we should have a one-size-fits-all approach to disaster recovery. And what's happening now with these new consolidated resource centers, the CRCs, right? You have individuals who are making policy and eligibility determinations on highly sensitive and highly specific and nuanced realities, but they've never stepped foot on the site with the applicant, never had a single conversation with the applicant, right? Never heard the context behind the request that's being made. In many cases, weren't even in the state or saw the damages from the disaster. And so I think that, returning to that localized structure, which allows the IBDs, the FCOs, et cetera, to have some authority and some autonomy would really benefit applicants in their recovery throughout the country.
Absolutely. And I think that's critical too. And I didn't mean to sound like I was trying to bash FEMA, because I'm definitely not. That's not where I was going with that question. But I think on the other side of it too is like, especially the locals, and you have jurisdictions that do not have professional emergency managers, right? They have people that are there, collateral duty, part-time people,
That's
people
right.
that have absolutely no formal training
That's
at
right.
all in emergency management, trying to do this job, and they don't understand even the idea of keeping records prior to during the response that can actually help you in the recovery side of things. So again, it's a double-edged sword. It's a double issues here. You got the locals who don't really understand what records need to be kept during the response. So when recovery occurs, it makes it easier too. I know that there's, and also like things like that you don't understand, like policy coming from local politicians that really impact recovery, such as like deferred maintenance on your building, right? They go, oh, we're going to save money by deferring maintenance on it, but when it comes to disaster, FEMA takes a look at that and says, well, of course your roof's leaked. You deferred maintenance on it for the last 6 years. We're not going to pay for that leaky roof now during a storm because you could have fixed it 6 months ago or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's those issues as well that I think play out.
You really hit on a lot of very good topics there, Todd. And as we discussed, it takes stakeholders at many different levels, right? So we spoke briefly about FEMA, but the states or the territories or the tribal governments play a very critical role in the FEMA PA process as well, right? And they all handle them very differently. Some states want a very transactional role, right? They want to be able to support that recovery reimbursements, right? The financial aspects. They want to make sure that the quarterly progress reports are completed and that the money is accounted for. All those things are very important, right? Some states, however, and the states that I feel have been the most successful with helping their communities recover are the states that really advocate and play a proactive role throughout that FEMA PA process, right? They help be a liaison and collaborate between the different partners, FEMA, the local private nonprofit groups, the local municipal governments, et cetera. And then you're exactly right. At the local level, you mentioned that in many cases, the emergency management division might be one person, right? It typically is an individual with a response background, former police, former fire, former military, and they're very good at the response portion, right?
Right.
But there's an entirely different skill set often needed for recovery. It might be engineering or architecture understanding. It might be the ability to develop cost estimates, benefit cost analyses using FEMA software. There's a huge grants management and financial management portion of this as well. So understanding those realities helps you prepare for recovery. Right. So one of the things that we help a lot of our clients with across the country is developing a recovery plan in blue sky days, right? Pre-incident, taking a look at what your labor policies say, taking a look at what your insurance policies say, identifying different ways that you can create templates and streamline processes so that if there is some sort of declared disaster, your fire agency and your police department, they already know how to record their time in a manner that satisfies the documentation requirements placed upon you by the federal government, regardless of who the agency is that's providing the funding, right?
That's such a struggle, right? I mean, like I've had this argument with the police chief regarding like saying, hey, get into practice today of tracking your miles and your times that you use in the vehicles, because during a disaster you got to keep tracking that. And if the people aren't doing it prior to a disaster, I was about to swear, when the crap hits the fan, and they're not going to track the miles, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean,
yeah.
People they work based on structure and practice, right? And it's very important to actually ingrain those good practices. Just for example, on the response side, it's obvious that we would do trainings and exercises, right? But on the recovery side, that's just administrative burden. Why would we go through this process when there's no disaster, right?
Right.
It's because if you don't do it beforehand, if it's not part of your day-to-day routine and your day-to-day process, that you're definitely not going to do it when the crap hits the fan, right?
Right.
When the paperwork is your least priority because there's lives and health and safety on the line.
Yeah, I mean, like I told him just add it to your to the officer's checkout of the vehicle, right? If you're checking your signs, you're checking your lights, you're making sure everything's working, do miles out, right? My vehicle says it has 2008 miles on it. Miles in. Now my vehicle says 2028 miles on. It's really easy. It's a very simple thing to do, but it's adding an additional step sometimes like throws people off. Hey, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about individual assistance as well. Hey everybody! Look, I'm excited to be working with my friend Sean Griffin over at Disaster Tech. They are the leading decision science platform for risk and resilience, and it's data, right? And really keeping track of data and making decisions based upon great data is very important. So they came up with a program called DICE. And it's a solution that helps your team plan and exercise across government and industry to leverage data and risk intelligence and accelerate evidence-based decision making. And ultimately, it saves more lives, more money, and more time. And you can follow them at Twitter at Disaster Tech Incorporated or INC, Disaster Tech INC for more updates. Also visit them if you guys go to IAEM because they're going to be there, and I'm sure Sean would love to see you. Speaking of that, IAEM, I'm going to be speaking at IAEM this year. I'm excited about that. And so hopefully if you guys are there, find me. I'll be around. I'd love to say hi. Maybe stop and we can have a soda or a coffee together, whatever, and chit chat. And then also going into New York City in November on the 17th and 18th, we're going to be having some great times with the Natural Disaster and Emergency Management Expo. And then we're going to be right there at the Javits Center and over in New York City. Is beautifully redone. I really love to see you guys over there as well. And I'm going to be sitting down talking about FEMA. I'm going to be sitting down doing a fireside chat with former administrators Craig Fugate and Pete Gaynor, and discussing what it is to be at the top, right? To be the emergency manager with all the different political stuff that's going on and whatnot that happens when you're there, and all the decisions have to be made. And Dan Scott, who can't be here today, said he will be there as well. So you can find Dan and me in New York, and Dan will also be at IEM as well. So we'll see both of you guys there. All right. Well, that being said, let's bring Mark back into the show. Mark, you going to be at the IEM?
Actually, I don't think so this year. Hagerty Consulting will be represented there. I typically do not attend that conference, but maybe I'll come this year just to see you, Todd.
That would be great. Well, hey, at a minimum, you can go to NDAM in New York City because I know you're right over there.
And I'm based in New York City, so yeah. Absolutely. If nothing else, you and I definitely need to catch up and break some bread. Absolutely.
So, individual assistance, it's such a sticky subject too, because I mean it's a whole different process, and I think the citizens, if you will, they get confused when you hear public assistance. They think that's the money going to them, and sure. Individuals, they don't understand the difference between PA and individual assistance IA. What's the process for individual assistance, and how can government agencies, local government agencies, help with that process?
Yeah, sure. So, first I'll just caveat the fact that my background is certainly in public assistance, much more so than IA, but individual assistance or IA is a extremely vital part of any community's recovery, right? And I would also, before diving in here, just like to commend what the Biden administration has already done to help on the individual assistance side in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. And FEMA has implemented. For example, FEMA has had historically very strict requirements for home ownership and proof of residence documentation, right? In the aftermath of Ida, they've actually expanded what is allowable and verifiable to prove that home ownership or proof of residence, to expand eligibility and to make the process much less frustrating and much more expeditious. And that also achieves some of their equity and inclusion goals as well, which is, obviously, FEMA should be applauded for that change. I think there's a lot of changes on top of that, or improvements that can also occur. I know that, one of the things that Brock Long, the former FEMA administrator, talks about relative to the IA programs, how many knocks on the door does it take before we get the information we need? Right. And I think after Harvey, it was something like 16 or 18 knocks, which is just too many. To answer your specific question, I think the private sector needs to continue to play a much larger role in disaster recoveries, and the different state, local, and federal governments really need to acknowledge that reality. I think 85% of infrastructure is actually owned by the private sector. Right. You're talking communications, you're talking water supply and wastewater management. You're talking electrical distribution, as we saw in Texas after winter weather event Uri, right? But yet they're not eligible for a lot of the federal funding mitigation and resilience programs because they're private companies. But they're the ones who are, providing the power and the water to the homes and the communities that are the ones who inevitably require the individual assistance, right? So I think that there's certainly a role for the private sector to play, and hopefully there's some additional prioritization of public-private partnerships, maybe a reevaluation of how we can provide, maybe it's BRIC funding or HMGP funding to allow support for infrastructure at a greater scale, right? So that less individual assistance is needed.
So as a local emergency manager, going back to that person who, doing part-time, doing collateral, may have come from the disasters for the response agencies, what can they do to really help their community with individual assistance? Like, can they teach people? I mean, what's the first step, I suppose? I'm asking.
Yeah, I think communication early and often, right? Pre-incident, having people understand where they need to look for information so that they understand, okay, what funding programs may be available? Where do I have to go, whether it be physically or via a website? Making sure they understand which Twitter feeds they should be following to make sure that the information they're getting is accurate information and not misinformation, which is not only prevalent after a disaster, but is exponentially increasing, right? We have bad actors who are actually, taking advantage of those realities. So I think it's communication, and making sure that individuals know where to go to get much needed information, whether that be, here's a site to keep warm. Here's a site to charge your phone. Here's a site that has working, water or shelter open. So I think communication is the single largest thing that could help individuals in their time of greatest need.
Absolutely. When I was working at the local government, we worked directly with Chamber of Commerce to create some flyers, information that we can hand out to local and small businesses, and also to the community members as well, regarding preparedness and recovery, right? Those two things go together. Talking about insurances that you should have and things like this is really great, because I think that's one thing that we miss when it comes to this. I know we talk about disaster preparedness in the general, it always gets to the disaster kit. Like, oh, here's my kit, right? Well, but you forget you should have like insurance. You should, understand where your documents are, so helping people understand what they need to have with them when they show up to the office for putting their paperwork through, I think is critical as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, a disaster kit is important, right? But it's much larger than a disaster kit. I think you mentioned insurance. Insurance is certainly we as a society, right? And then there's certainly some areas that do better than others, but we are underinsured relative to the perils that we face. And those perils are increasing in frequency, in magnitude, in type. 20 years ago, after 9/11, the emergency management field was completely different. Right? It's been specialized. Brock Long, a former FEMA administrator, Steve Hagerty, founder and president of Hagerty Consulting, just put out a great thought piece on the state of emergency management 20 years after 9/11. And they talk a lot about these issues. And certainly insurance is one of them. But it's also just the greater understanding of what is emergency management, right? And we cannot rely on the federal government to play every single role after a disaster.
Absolutely.
Right? It has to be federally supported, but I think again, we have to go back to the private sector, and the insurance companies play a major role in this. And getting to my earlier point is, I think, there was 9/11, which is obviously very localized to New York and Pennsylvania and DC. And then we have Katrina, which was obviously the next largest catastrophic incident, maybe arguably so. But we look at it now and we look at the landscape where every single state, territory, and tribal government is under declared incident. Nobody's safe, right? Whether it's wildfire, inland flooding, hurricanes, cyber attacks, terrorist attacks, etc. There's a lot of preparedness that needs to be done at the individual and the community level.
Speaking of that, I know we spoke about this before the show started, and neither one of us is our oil response expert, but Huntington Beach is dealing, or not just Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, Laguna Beach,
Orange County.
Orange County. Yeah, they're dealing with the oil spill right now. If you guys have not heard about this, there was some sort of incident at one of the rigs that are out in the ocean. The pipe broke in some way. They're still speculating how it happened at this point, so I don't want to add to the speculation. But regardless, there was a leak, and which has a severe, well, I don't know if severe, but definitely consequential economic impact to the communities. Right? The Newport or Huntington Beach was in the middle of an air show that they had to cancel, which had a lot of economic impact to that.
Yeah.
How do you recover from something like that? I mean, like, that's just an amazing, we've had oil spills elsewhere, but especially in a populated area like Orange County, California.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the economic impact is always a reality of any recovery, right? Whether you're talking about a hurricane off the Gulf Coast or an oil spill off California, it's a very difficult thing to recover from because there's no magic bullet, right? In many cases, these catastrophic incidents wipe out all revenue for some period of time. The tax base changes, the number of individuals who are available to even work to provide services. All of those things change. I think in the case of Orange County and with this oil spill, the best defense is a good offense, or maybe it's the opposite. The best offense is a good defense. Is being diversified, right? Having economic stabilization and economic revenue sources that aren't going to be uniformly impacted by a single incident. Now, that's obviously much easier said than done, but I think that's why some places can really get back on their feet much quicker, because there isn't just a single factory that blew away in that tornado that provided 90% of the overall economic security of that locality. So again, much easier said than done. Obviously, a very complex and difficult issue to solve for, but economic impact continues to be a major. Look, COVID-19. I mean, there's in the history of the U.S., I don't think there's been any catastrophic incident or declared disaster that's had a larger economic impact than COVID-19. And the government is going to great lengths to combat that.
No, absolutely. It's such a process. Now, I'm gonna one last question because we're getting here close to the end. You mentioned disaster recovery plans, and not every jurisdiction has a disaster recovery plan. They sort of have a section, maybe an annex in their emergency operations plan. But why should a disaster recovery plan be separate from their emergency operations plan?
I'm not saying that it should or shouldn't, to be honest with you. I think that, in fact, it's probably a piece of a much larger disaster preparedness plan and disaster response plan. But I do think right now that long-term recovery planning is deprioritized, right? Because number one, it's hard, it's complex. Number two, there's not immediate life, health, and public safety ramifications, right? So maybe it's correctly, secondary on that list. But what happens is you don't necessarily know that you needed it until there's some sort of catastrophic event. And then you're going, okay, how do I recoup this $150+ million of uninsured loss, right? And And what about the $20 million in force account labor that my city or county or community has incurred that we don't have documentation for, right? And that can be maybe not equally as catastrophic, but the second phase of the disaster.
Absolutely. So Aaron Leroy asked a question. He says, Mark, at your time at Hagerty, what's an aha moment from a client that realized that your team's role in their DR plans and thus success?
Yeah, there's been a lot of aha moments, to be honest with you. Our clients directly attribute an additional $3 billion of federal funding as a direct result of hiring Hagerty, right? $3 billion, a lot of money, but it's also not, it's not tangible. It's not personal, right? I will tell you that there are multiple instances where I have clients have come to me in tears because they were originally worried that this facility or this community, this municipal government was going to cease to exist because there was no way that they were actually going to be able to recover. And we've been able to help them through the complex processes, through the complex programs in a strategic and eligible manner to not only rebuild, but to, again, rebuild bigger, better, stronger. And, for those of you who don't know me, I'm an architect by education. I didn't know anything about emergency management or cost recovery before Hurricane Katrina, actually, where I thought, I'm young, I don't have a wife, I don't have kids, I'm going to go help. I'm going to use my background and go help. That's how I got into this environment. And I think that many individuals in emergency management or in recovery have similar stories. And that the common thread between all of us is the desire to help people and to help people in their time of often greatest need. And that for us and for me personally, that's what provides those aha moments, is when I'm able to help a single person or a single community or an entire state recover in a more expeditious and successful manner.
What a great way to end the show. That's awesome. Hey, so if anybody's going to hold you, how can they find you, Mark?
I'm sorry, Todd, I missed that.
Oh, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, how can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. My email's on Hagerty Consulting website, mark.o'mara@hagertyconsulting.com. That's Hagerty with 1 G. Please feel free to contact me for any reason. I'm happy to help. Emerging emergency managers who are looking to get into the business, who want advice, individuals who want to bounce an idea or get a second opinion. FEMA's telling me this. Is this right? What are you seeing? What are good lessons learned and good practices? So please feel free to reach out. My door is always open. My phone is always on.
Mark, thank you so much for your time today.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Todd.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody, thank you for spending your time and your morning with me today as well. And it's always great having these conversations. Disaster recovery really is one of the areas as emergency management that we really need to be focusing on when it comes to helping our community out. And so at the end of the day, hey, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast player. And hey, join us on LinkedIn. We have lots of great conversations over there. There's some polls, things like this, and other things that are happening. John Fontaine doing a good job asking questions out there for the community. Love to have you part of this community. Until next week, stay safe, stay hydrated.